Thank you very much, Susan, and welcome to New York, Frank.
Thank you. Looks like a healthy group out there.
Yes, well, this has been a big year for you. You have turned,
Don't tell them.
I'm going to reveal the deep, dark secret that you have turned 90, and which...
So if people keep saying that, I won't be able to get any more work.
Well, you are 45 twice, and that's a prime age for architects, so it's fine. But you've always been a young architect, so you just be a 90-year-old young architect. Your birthday's been celebrated from Berlin to Los Angeles, but not yet marked in New York. So please let us indulge just a little bit of discussion about it. Although I think the most memorable thing you said about your birthday, if I recall correctly, was your response to a toast at the dinner in your honor at the Getty in Los Angeles a few weeks ago, where you stood up, and I think your entire speech was, "Thank you very much, and tomorrow morning I'm going back to work." You have no interest in doing anything other than what you're doing, right? Right. And despite your concerns, you do seem to have new jobs coming in, right?
Yeah.
Does that mean not enough of them?
Oh, no, I have. But I am doing stuff outside architecture.
Okay, you want to talk about that first?
Well, I've done some set design in the past, and I like it.
Right.
So Wayne Shorter and his friend Esperanza Spalding are doing an opera that'll be at the Kennedy Center, and they've asked me to do the sets. And so it's like nothing else I've experienced, because when you talk about jazz, it's indeterminate. You don't. As Wayne says, you can't rehearse what you ain't invented. So the meetings are incredibly strange for me. The orchestra plays a little bit, and then they stop, and then Wayne goes, then they play again, and they know what he said. And so I've been to enough of them now that I'm beginning to understand it, which is weird. and it's very open-ended, very exciting. I have no clue
what you're going to do.
I don't know. It starts based on a Greek tragedy, Iphigenia, but I think it's going way out of space from there.
Well, you did Don Giovanni at the LA Philharmonic.
Yeah,
right?
And we did a Janacek opera at Bard once.
Uh-huh. Well, now, in both of those cases, you were doing a set for an opera within a building you had designed.
Yeah, and I did one in Berlin at Orfeo.
Uh-huh.
And that was funny because the director of the theater, it was so overpowering that he kept changing our design. Every time I'd give him a model, he'd move it. And so the opera was a collaborative effort of which I had no control. Right. And it was hilarious, actually.
Right. Do you find, I know that at this point, and we'll talk in a few minutes about some different projects, you're doing a mix of very large and small projects, some of which, like set design, are the sort of things that you obviously are not doing because of the enormous fees they bring in that keep your office going.
Zero.
Right, okay. But you're doing because you love doing them.
Yeah.
Do you find now, at this moment, you're picking and choosing jobs more? Or do you take on stuff to pay the rent and all that? Or do you feel you have the luxury not to have to do that?
I don't. Maybe sometime along the way I had to do it a bit, but I always turn stuff down. I was just with Steve Ross before I got here, and he reminded me that I turned
He did
him.
not ask you to do an opera set?
No.
No, okay.
And he reminded me I turned him down for the project in LA that we ended up doing for him. But so I got to feel right about it
Right.
somehow. I don't know.
Well, since you mentioned that, let's jump ahead.
Hudson Yards.
To Hudson Yards,
I
yes,
knew
right. If you're in New York, you can't last that long without talking about Hudson Yards.
Well, I went to pay homage to the guy.
Right.
And talked to him about it.
And?
And
Well, but you are doing an apartment tower for the second phase, right? Across 11th Avenue.
we're supposed to, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so what do I think of it, right? Well, I haven't really walked down in it.
Okay.
But I thought that you had an administration in place, a political administration with Bloomberg and what's the other guy's name?
Dan Doctoroff?
Dan Doctoroff.
And Amanda Burden?
Amanda Burden, Kate Yellen, whoever else.
Kate Levin.
Levin.
Yeah.
That were all pretty savvy about city building.
Right.
So I think, I assume they had some input. Mm-hmm. And since from the outside, it looks like a bunch of the same old New York. You just kept building it.
Right.
I haven't been down in it. I know the vessel, they call it, is controversial. I haven't actually seen it, but I've seen the models of it. I'm neutral. I think that over time, people will probably learn to love it in some way. And I think our building is right next to the vessel, so.
But across 11th Avenue.
Across
toward the river.
11th Avenue.
Right.
And so in our design, I'm trying to relate to it, to give it a more of a context. And the other buildings, I have no sense of. The new ones are Bob Stern and.
But that's all the new phase that isn't built yet. Yeah.
I turned this off.
That must be Steve Ross, who heard what we were saying and is already calling you. I hope you haven't lost the job.
I did turn it off.
Okay, it's all right. I'm not sure I agree with you, though, about it being more of the same New York. I think, in fact, people, if it were truly more like the rest of New York, people might like it better. I think, in fact, there's a feeling that it's even bigger.
I'm assuming there's a commercial, retail, fancy restaurants,
right.
New stuff that's pretty exciting to everybody. Not necessarily to me, but to somebody. That creates a lively space at street level, and that's what I've assumed.
I think that's the problem. I think people would love to see more of that, and it isn't. It's more of a mall.
And so the building I'm doing
is
I'm relating to that fantasy.
Right. Okay.
The building that I'm doing will relate to that fantasy, but.
All right. Well, it is another world on the other side of 11th Avenue. So let us be hopeful about phase 2.
Yeah, so what other projects in New York that are being built are better?
Well, there are many that are at least have the virtue of being smaller, if not better. So I suppose there's that. Let's return to your birthday for a moment, a safer subject, I think.
I got him, huh?
Only so that we can talk for a moment about another celebration, which was the one that was on your actual birthday that took place in Berlin in the chamber music hall that you designed for Daniel Barenboim. And actually, if we can get that on the screen for a moment, we can show you.
That's the maquette of it.
This is the maquette for it. And
it's inside that building.
Right, inside that building. And this is kind of what it looks like, right? Do you want to tell the story of that project, which is such an unusual one, and what it meant for you? And how it ended up being your birthday venue?
Wow.
There it is, actually.
Well, I didn't know Daniel Barenboim. I knew everybody around him, but never met him. I was very upset with stuff going on in Israel. I was doing a museum of tolerance, it was called, and I decided it wasn't as tolerance as I thought it was.
Right.
So I got out of it, and I felt guilty about that, having grown up Jewish, even though I'm not religious or anything. And so there was an event to write a protest against the settlement Oriel, which I signed. Mm-hmm. And then I got a yelling, screaming phone call from my cousin who lives in Oriel. Mm-hmm. And then I found out that Daniel Barenboim also signed that. So I sort of followed the train, found out that he was working with Edward Said on a project bringing the art, using the arts for people of disparate philosophies and cultures to talk to each other, which is a big thing I really believe in, and that's why years before I accepted the project in Abu Dhabi, because Tom Krenz promised that was the mission. Mm-hmm. So I gave a studio at Yale to design a place for the Divan Orchestra, and we asked where they would want to be. And a friend called Barenboim and asked him, he said, Istanbul. So then I gave that as a studio. And part of the studio at Yale is you go travel to the place. We went there, I met Daniel. His architect showed me through the building and what they were doing. And at the end of the thing said, Mr. Gehry, it would be a great honor for me if you would design the concert hall piece. And mm-hmm. I thought, why are you giving away your... Anyway, they made a big deal of it. So I did it. I ended up doing it as a gift for them because I believed in it. And it was built and opened, and it's 700 seats, and it was named after Pierre Boulez, who was a friend of both Daniel's and mine for years. So
I don't think you explained how it got from Istanbul to Berlin, however.
Right. Istanbul was a fictional.
Oh, okay.
That was
right.
He wanted to be there because the passports for the musicians.
Mm-hmm. I see.
But what really moved me a lot, and probably would a lot of you, is the auditions. Because if you go, I've been to several of them. And then I traveled with the orchestra. My wife and I traveled to Buenos Aires with them. You see Israelis, Palestinians, Syrians, and all their native stuff getting up on stage and playing together. And it's so beautiful. And you can't tell them apart. I said, you're Israeli, and 9 out of 10 I said, no, I'm Palestinian, or I'm Syrian or something else, and I could never figure it out. And it was so beautiful. I really became emotionally involved with it.
Well, I remember when you were designing this hall that's on the screen now, when I was finishing the research for the book, and you were obsessing over the model in your office in a way that even beyond projects 10 times as big.
I know, I go crazy.
You were sort of really, and it is an amazing, incredibly beautiful small hall.
It's been very successful, and Daniel called me last year and said, on your birthday, we're having a concert, and Martha Argerich is coming. We're going to do Schumann, and we're going to do Boulez's piece with 3 pianos and 3 harps, which is Sur and Cis. And can we talk you into letting us have your birthday there. So I thought, great, they'll wish me happy birthday, and that'll be nice. And behind my back, they invited a whole lot of people.
You thought you could escape your birthday by going to Berlin, and your birthday followed you, basically.
No, it was beautiful and moving and thrilling and all that kind of nice stuff.
Yeah, no, it was an extraordinary event. But can we talk also just for a moment about what music has come to mean to you? Because clearly, although you're not yourself a musician, you become very deeply involved as a listener in music. You said to me not long ago that it takes you into another realm where you're not competitive, which is perhaps a way of saying you're more comfortable hanging around musicians than architects. I don't know. Can we?
You got that point, didn't you?
Do musicians behave better, or is it just that?
No, it's just not. We're not in the same game, so it's
Right.
very, very interesting. And but my mother took me to concerts in Toronto when I was a kid, since I was eight years old, maybe. And all through the years, it was something I could have access to easily, even though we were poor, sort of. So so I liked to listen, and I lived in Toronto, and Glenn Gould, it was the time he was doing the Goldberg Variations, which is my old name.
I know. Yes, which then became the Gehry Variations.
So I know. I thought, so they were doing it for me. So, but I've stayed involved, and when I got out in practice, I did the Merriweather Post Pavilion in Maryland, and met with symphony people, and then from there started to get work in music, and I nurtured it.
Culminating in Walt Disney Concert Hall in
Yeah,
LA.
so,
right?
but I did work at the Hollywood Bowl. Anything that had to do with music, I would run and do it, you know. So.
And now, I know you go to Walt Disney quite a lot. Actually, let's get that on the screen.
Yeah, I do. And I pay for my own ticket.
Do you find it easy or difficult to listen to music in your own hall?
I love it.
Okay.
I don't know how deeply you want to go into this, but
We can go into it, yeah.
so when I got the project, Ernest Fleischman was the director of the LA Phil. And he and I traveled together to Leipzig and Berlin and everything. And at that point, what's the name of the architect in Berlin? I forget.
Oh, Hans Scharoun?
Hans Scharoun. The Scharoun
New Philharmonic Hall.
Philharmonic had been built already. And it was it was the North Star for everybody. Everybody was going to do that. And I went there with Ernest, and we met with Hans Scharoun's acoustician was still alive. Our acoustician was Dr. Nagata, and Dr. Kramer, the German acoustician, told us how much he loved his student, Dr. Nagata, and Dr. Nagata told us how much he loved his teacher, Dr. And so I said, well, the Scharoun Hall looks like this in plan, with the orchestra here at the widest part. Between the two of you, what should I do? Which way? So Kramer said, of course, this is it. And Nagata said, of course, this is it, with the narrow, so it was like that. And I said, which one, guys? And I remember they got into quite an argument about it. But in traveling after that, I became interested in the Concertgebouw because it was a wider shoebox. The shoebox is what at that time was the main idea.
Right, which is why in New York we're stuck with David Geffen Hall in its present form, I think.
But it's not bad. I mean, I can tell you about that. Mm-hmm. But so the Ernest and I spent a lot of time talking about this, and we built tons of models, which are in the book somewhere. But we could go 130 to 135 feet wide and still work within the realm of the acoustician's parameters. And by doing that, you got seats on the side, and seats behind the orchestra, like Boulez always asked for. That's what he asked for when he did the rug concerts at here. He put,
right.
And I attended those concerts many years ago. He moved the
orchestra out into the hall, right?
To the hall, and that's the solution.
Yeah, right.
And so I forgot what I was talking about.
Well, we were just talking about Walt Disney Concert Hall and
the
pleasure you take
that's
still
the
in going there.
problem of 90. You forget. I mean.
Right.
Okay. So I think that by doing that, we got a more compact hall than the Philharmonie.
Right.
And I think that a lot of my brethren in architecture have not analyzed enough these issues and have followed the Berlin model.
Too literally, you mean?
Too literally.
Right,
yeah.
right.
And it's got to be tighter. And so.
Good. And
that's it.
Right.
That's my story.
Let's just quickly talk about as a way into some of the newer work you're doing, about a couple of the new music projects you're doing. Two of them in LA, which I think we also have images of. The Young Orchestra of Los Angeles, and a new venue for the Coburn Music School in Los Angeles. Let's see if we can get these up in a moment.
That's Disney.
Then I know we're going to get these in one sec. We'll find them. Ooh,
that's my
going
house.
the wrong way. We can't seem to get. There we are. Okay.
So
have it in a moment.
Yola, the first building you're going to show, is an old bank building existing. And yeah, and it looks like that. I'm on the board of the Phil, so what we're doing, and I mess with everything that has to do with architecture. So I showed them that if they made a skylight on top and raised the roof a little bit, and then dropped the floor inside, a part of it, they would get the 45 feet high needed to make it a reasonable space for a full orchestra. Yola is a student thing with kids from the neighborhood, but even then, for them to experience in their rehearsal space the height of a real room is probably valuable. And it wasn't that much extra money to do that.
I mean, it's still basically a cheap building, right?
Yeah, I haven't done anything to building yet.
Right. I mean,
I'm getting credit for that, but I didn't do that.
But you know,
I don't want credit for that.
But I think what's especially interesting, given that from time to time you've been criticized, I think possibly erroneously, for doing elaborate, expensive, arbitrary shapes. Right. I know. We're bringing that up again only to explain that it's not really true.
It's not true.
That you do a lot of cheap buildings and simple buildings, and things that are reworked inside old buildings, as this did, and as it did even the Pierre Boulez Saal in Berlin. The Barenboim Hall is inside an older building.
So I have been all my architectural life very budget conscious. And so we do first studies, we make a model of the project volume and sort of a quick study of what it contains and everything. And we have a cost estimate made that's has proven over the years to be pretty close to the neighborhood. We use that as a base, and that's a base for just a dumb box. But
right.
So I know that to make it architecturally more interesting, it's going to cost 10% maybe, or 15% more than that.
Okay.
So it's something like that. So we follow those rules, and we tell the clients that, and we work with them. And I think we do it. So I think the problem you have with cultural projects is the board of directors, who usually has a contractor.
Right.
I hope one's here so he gets mad at me. And they usually know everything better than I do. And so in the case of Disney, the guy started construction of the building, the first go-around, before the drawings were complete. The drawings were being done by another architect, but
which was part of the problem, right? Because you were not permitted to.
Yeah, but they
do the
weren't
working
complete,
drawing.
and
Right.
nobody would own up to that. And he ordered the steel, and it got there, and there was no place to put it, and it wasted tons of money. So I think, and I got credit for it, for
Right.
being over budget. So,
Right.
but in the end, when it's all analyzed, I was pretty close to their budget. But
And Bilbao was on a very tight budget, the Guggenheim in Bilbao, right?
yeah, it was built. The budget was $100 million, and we built it for 97. So
These days, it sometimes feels like you couldn't renovate a kitchen for that in New York today. I mean,
we've developed over time a computer program and a way of analyzing and controlling costs, so that the tower on 8 Spruce Street,
which we saw, that was the building on the screen with the rainbow. It has a perpetual rainbow around it.
so the curtain wall, which is very complicated, had no change orders. So that saves
Right.
a lot of money. So it offsets
Right.
the cost for complexity. So I think it's a matter of value engineering everything and making sure you're getting what you paid for and what you need, and not
Right.
the mistakes of everybody that knows better than everybody else.
While we're talking about costs and budgets and housing, why don't we talk for a moment about your own house situation, since you recently changed houses. This is your old house, which was built in Santa Monica for a relatively modest amount of money in 1978 originally, right?
Yeah, so that we had $50,000 for construction. The house was there. You don't see it
You
because
see a little bit of it poking up in the center. Yeah.
And so all I did is there was a front yard, side yard that was outside the edge of the existing building, so we could build out. So on the side yard, by building out to the edge, we got a slice of space that we turned into a kitchen and dining room.
Actually, there's a view of it.
And then the floor was asphalt. And I wish I'd taken a picture of it, but there was one of those steam rollers rolling out the asphalt in that room. It was a great picture, and I didn't take it, but So when you're in this room, the existing house, you can see the window on the right. It's like a stage, and so it's like a stage set. So it made the old house like a stage set, and then all of the skylights and windows are above eye level, so they look up to the trees because you're on a busy city street, and so I wanted the feeling of being in a garden, and so that's what we did.
So you lived happily there for 40 years, right, or more?
Yeah.
And then what happened?
I guess we earned some money or something. I have a son that is working with me. He's an architect and trying to be an architect. He went to art school. He wouldn't go to architecture school. And so we found this lot, and we built a spec house. The idea was him to design it. It's a beautiful lot, and sell it. The tax thing requires that we live in it for 1 year.
Okay.
So Berta and I moved in, and it's 3 times bigger than the other house. So the two of us get lost, and we need to put little bells on our shoes or something. But Sam did it, and he riffed on stuff that I was doing earlier with big beams, big 12 by 12s. And he did the living room, dining room, and the upstairs bedroom with this aesthetic. And so it's mostly glass. And that's the living room. It's all glass ceiling. You can close it in, so if you need it too, but it's pretty nice. And it's like being in a garden. And the dining room is raised, so this is lowered 2 feet from the entry, and the dining room is raised 2 feet from the entry, so they're not at the same level. And so they get different views of the ocean. And I can't figure out how Sam figured out all those beams, because I lie in bed and look at them, and they don't make sense to me. But I was a pushy client. I mean, I had opinions, and I voiced them, but I let him pretty much go, and even some of the mistakes that I thought he was making, but he was adamant, so I let him do it, and it came out great.
And so you're living in it.
So we moved in for a year, and we still have the other house, and it's been a year and a half.
Right.
And some of our music friends come to town and stay there at the other one.
The other one. Right.
But I'm not sure what we're going to do. I could go any way right now.
Well, there's no reason not to keep both.
Yeah.
I mean,
I guess. I love the view. I love the feeling of living in a garden.
mm-hmm.
And we have some guest spaces, and we have one of the rooms is made into a music room. It looks like this, but it's at the other back of the house. And it's we've had a couple of concerts there for fundraising.
Thank you. Great.
And it works really well, and I love doing that because it brings some of the musicians over for an evening, and we can seat about 40 or 50 people.
Great. Which you cannot do although in the other house you did once have Yo-Yo Ma.
Yeah,
I recall play at a benefit for the Obama campaign.
Yeah.
So you have done some music in the other house too.
I love it. I can't.
Yeah.
It's my drugs.
Music.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. We'll turn to questions in a moment, but I want to ask you about one other big new LA project that you took on, which is the LA River. And let's see if we can get the,
So that's another philanthropy thing.
okay.
6 years ago, somebody came to me from the mayor's office and said, New York has a thing called the High Line, and they're making a lot of money on it. And we have a Los Angeles River that's 51 miles long. Help us do something with it. We want to monetize it. So I looked at him and I thought that the High Line is a rusty old railroad bridge. That's true, right?
Yeah.
And you put some flowers on it and stuff. And the river, LA River is a flood control project.
And it's 51 miles long, which...
And it has
Right.
And nobody wants to believe it. They've all, over the years, have believed that you could use it for recreation. And the fact is you can't. It's not safe. In the last rains, part of the river where they have trees in the river, which gives people the sense that they can use it for recreation, had, after the rain, had bicycles up in the trees. Mm-hmm. So you cannot. And so we studied it. We studied the public health issues. We studied the traffic issues. We studied all of it. And it just happens, and the county owns the land. It's one piece under one ownership, which makes it enticing because it goes through neighborhoods south of LA, where these little towns of Bell, Cudahy, Compton, where children living there have a 10-year shorter lifespan. This is proven because there's no open space. And I've had calls from those mayors of those communities when they heard we were working on this that helped them because they have kids that are 10 years old and they don't like the prospect. So because the river runs through those neighborhoods, right through the center of them, and because the county owns the land, our thought was an obvious one, to cover the river, and we figured out how to do it, how to span it with walls that run parallel to the stream. And you can, in the 3-mile section that goes through most of those communities, you can get about a little over a third of Central Park, 600 feet wide by 3 miles long.
So a linear park, basically. Yeah.
And it's within walking distance of all those communities that the kids have no open space. And so we made that proposal, and we're going to do and it's been very well received as an idea. So we're building a test case of 150 feet wide, and Laurie Olin, the landscape architect, is working with me on it. There it shows if you put the walls between that are parallel to the river's run, you can lower the spans so that you can use precast concrete beams and just put 4 feet of dirt on top. So it's not outrageous. It's not billions. It's
right.
So it's rational. Mm-hmm. There was a need for a community center in the 3-mile part, and so we've convinced the communities to make it a cultural center and bring Youth Orchestra LA, that is Dudamell's reconstruction of
the building we saw.
Sistema, yeah, but came from he came up from 4 years old through El Sistema in Venezuela, which has 800,000 to 1 million kids. Mm-hmm. And its program's the most incredible arts education program I've ever seen. So Yola will come in, and LACMA, LA County Museum, is going to continue work with us. And people we've talked, we're working with Colburn, and they said they would want to be involved. And they're dance people like Benjamin Melpier has offered himself. Right. And a lot of the artists that live in that area have offered to play.
You know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, and then we do those turnaround schools that Michelle Obama started when she was in the White House. And so I've got 26 of them in California, out of 300. It's we'll never get there, but so we're funding 10 of them along the river, and they're within walking distance. So these are arts education programs put into the schools with math and all the other stuff. And they've been working for helping attendance and so on. And we bring artists to those schools like David Hockney and
so the River Project feels like it has a good shot at happening.
Yeah, and we're also building low-cost housing as part of it. Right. And we've got the city to put a train stop there.
Right.
And everybody seems for it. So
you've been in LA for it's now you've been in LA for 72, I think, of your 90 years. And how has it changed in these years?
Wow. Well, it's gotten bigger and wider and blah, 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 and more traffic and all the crazy things. I think what's interesting is, for me, is growing up as an architect and a big part of the art world and so on, is that we enjoyed a cover from all you guys here in New York. Because it was, the architecture scene here was backbiting, killing, doing everything. It felt like, I don't know if it really was, but it was very complacent out in LA. Nobody was. And so I think that we had the nice protective cover of Hollywood, because everybody's interested in Hollywood. They didn't care about what the other stuff as much back then at the beginning. And still there's a lot of that. And I find it comforting, actually. You can hide out.
Let's turn to...
Anyway, that's...
Good. Let's turn to a few of these questions, actually. What is one project you regret turning down? And while you think about that, there's a follow-up question. What is one project you wish you had not turned down?
They're the same question.
Well, they're inversions of the same question, yes.
God, I can't remember. I did turn down projects that didn't feel right, even when I needed work, because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do stuff with it. I can't remember what I turned.
Well, do you? I mean, the nature of the project means a lot to you, but who the client is does too, right? I mean, you want a feeling that you're kind of simpatico with them, that you can talk to them.
Right. I can't remember. I did do it, but I can't remember who. Megan. New York Times.
Right.
Voila.
That's true. You did turn down the New York Times. Thank you, Megan, for reminding us.
And I regret it.
Okay, good. So no, it is not because you believe, along with the president, that it's the enemy of the people. You did not turn it down for that reason.
And I was with David Childs, and we presented the model, and the elder Salzberger hugged me, and he loved it. I think you remember all that.
Yep.
It was the circumstance of it, and I don't want to go into it. It was.
Well, it's all in the book, actually, anyway.
Oh, it is?
It is, yeah. It is all.
Buy the book. He needs the money.
It is all. That is all in the book. But as I recall, that they wanted you to commit to being in New York all the time, and you were not so happy about that.
No, I was partners with SOM, so they had a big office here, so it didn't need me to be here. But the guy got arbitrary and said I had to be here every Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock for a meeting, and I said, I live in LA, I can't. And he made it clear that that was a condition. And so I called him up. I called David Childs and told him I'm getting out. I called the Times, whoever was the representative, I forget. And I sent a check back for the competition that they paid, and I felt good about it.
And so did Renzo Piano felt good about it too, I guess.
I know.
Job, right.
And he called me and thanked me.
All right.
And I had a good design. You don't have the picture of it.
A picture. We don't have that picture here. No.
That's why I'm sorry it didn't happen. It would have been pretty. I would have.
No, it would have been quite wonderful if it had happened, actually. Yeah.
And the Times guys liked it, but.
Here's another question. Does the political landscape of the location of a project influence whether or not you will take on that project?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want me to go into it?
Well, you could. Well, actually, maybe let's broaden the question and let's talk for a moment about what architecture means at a political moment like this one. Okay. I mean, do you believe architects should be more political or less political?
Well, I think architects should be people and express their conscience and their beliefs and live by them. And if there is a culture that wants to hire you that is not living by standards of humanity and respect for humanity and that you believe in, then don't do it, because it's going to be trouble. You're going to be arguing with them all along. I was reluctant when Tom Krenz brought me the Abu Dhabi Project because I didn't know the culture. I felt like, and they had a tough time schedule, and I thought it's going to be impossible. So I said that to him, and he promised me that they were going to, they were on board, that the museum would be designed for artists from all over those countries, including Israel, and they lived up to that. Unfortunately, it didn't get built that time. But I used to go to meetings with the curators, and there were Israeli curators with Palestinian curators and everybody there, and it was great. So I felt somewhat part of it. The model design, we did about 30 models. I didn't know where to go with it. Architecturally, I didn't know how to attach to their culture. And I saw that they would hang out under a trellis and smoke their pipes or drink their cafe or whatever they were. And it seemed to be something that was part of their culture. So one of the models I made, I decided to try and cool the outdoor spaces. And I thought, what's the cheapest way to cool a space? And I thought of the teepee. It's cheap, it's just a cone with a hole in the top. So I took a bunch of paper, made a bunch of teepees, and put them on one of the models. And it happened to be blue paper that I had. It was just by accident. And they came for the first meeting, and they came burning in, and they saw that, and they said, how did you understand our culture so perfectly? And I thought, oy vey.
An expression they understood well.
So then they insisted on that, and then if you see, even when you see the building built, there are these big cones that grew out of that.
Right.
But I figured out the reason they liked it is because they were used to mosques with multiple domes, and so this is a multiple
Right.
of one shape, and they felt comfortable with that. And they turned out to be very open in the end to doing things. It just that it didn't get built, and now they want to build it again. It's 10 years later, and it's kind of...
I mean, the project keeps like coming alive and almost happening and then not happening.
And it's a lot of it happened to the genius of Mr. Krenz, who was also the genius behind Bilbao. And
but do you think it will happen now, or?
they're working on it now, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you feel I mean, Walt Disney Hall was designed in one iteration, started, stopped, restarted, and you made significant changes to it in the version that was completed. Do you feel you would want to update and change this, or are you happy with it as it is?
I have no choice to change it.
Oh, okay.
When we stopped work, the working drawings were done.
Okay.
The pilings were built, so they want to build it now.
Right.
And that's what's difficult to me, because it's like warmed over stuff, you know? And it's hard for me to get into it. I'm having a hard time.
You feel the ideas, you worked through the ideas already.
Yeah.
Right.
And the art world has changed.
Right.
And Tom Krenz's megalomania art
feels actually very old-fashioned now.
It's different.
Yeah.
and the new director has a different form of...
How do the ideas there relate? Let's talk about the most recent large museum you did, which is Lvmh in Paris, which we can
That was a dreamboat.
find a moment ago. Yeah.
But it's a client. You know, it takes a partnership. These relationships have to be a partnership, and it can't be, the architect told me to do this, or the architect. It can't be that way. It's got to be a collaboration, 50-50. It really works. For the architect, it means you're not repeating yourself because you have this other voice. So in France, the protocol in architecture historically was the Beaux-Arts model. You did an esquisse, they called it, in 1 week. You did a drawing of the project, and then the school mandated that you never changed it, and what you did is finish that. So that's very much in the French culture, and my clients were very much part of that culture. So they saw the very early sketches, which for me I was just looking.
Yeah.
And they said they liked that one. So then every time I tried to move off it,
No, this is all right.
But Frank, you...
Well, you do like to keep working on things. I know that because, didn't...
Yeah, well, it takes time to evolve it. I may be a genius, but I'm not that genius that I can come...
I know that one painful episode in Los Angeles years ago was when you were doing a house for Eli Broad. And he announced... He decided the design was finished long before you decided it was finished, and essentially took it and gave it to the contractor
and built it.
Said, build this. And you said, it's not ready yet, I'm still playing with it.
And I've never gone to see it.
Right.
And we're friends. That's hard.
Right. But Lvmh has been, here's the auditorium, has been a happy enough story so that you're now working on another project with them.
Well, the Lvmh, when Bernard Arnault and his wife took me to the site of the Jardin d'Acclimatation, the children's garden, I realized as we arrived that this must be where Proust played. And I started crying. I couldn't believe it. And So that brought a whole lot of history to me of what the site was. And it's for children, and Proust was a young child, and
Right.
that whole story with him, I forget the names of the girls, Geraldine and whatever. So that really moved me, and then it was to replace a building that existed. There was a bowling alley, and it was a certain height, and the law was you couldn't build above that height. If you couldn't build above that height, you couldn't do a really good building. So it took a while to explore what the options were, and the obvious option was that historically there are beautiful park buildings, and they are in the jardin as well, in glass. So I was able to discuss that with the mayor and the people that worry about things like that, and convinced them that we would build a glass building, and inside of it we would build a solid building. So you'd have these two. It's expensive to do that, but then it would be like the outside building could be used for art as well. And I talked to a lot of the artists who said they would be happy to work in there. And in fact, after the building was completed, my friend Daniel Buren did take over the building and put all his colors over it, so he completely got rid of my building.
Oh yeah, I wish we had a picture of it. It looked quite extraordinary.
It was extraordinary. I knew he would do that.
And you did not mind?
No, I invited him. And I know Daniel, he's overbearing and he can't help it. But I love him dearly, and I was so happy about it. But I was happy when it was gone, too.
Well, you've said several times that you reject the belief, the argument that artists want only neutral spaces, that they actually enjoy some engagement with architecture, so long as...
Yeah, very early in my life, when I did that first house that you showed at the beginning, Buren and a couple others, I forget names, but art historian types who are well known, came to visit me and asked me, looking at my house, and they liked it, and they said, if you were given a museum, what would you do? And this was very early. I hadn't even considered doing a museum. And I said, well, I think a museum, you have to do neutral, white walls, box, so that the art is... And they started screaming at me, saying that's the last thing we want. We want to engage with the building. We want the building to be important. We want to go home and tell our family that we're in an important building, that we're part of something bigger than just white box galleries. And that stuck with me all the time. And most of the artists I know do believe that and are engaging. In Bilbao, Tom and I created a rule that we would build the box galleries with white boxes for the artists who are no longer alive, so they couldn't defend themselves.
And Bilbao does have a number of relatively simple galleries.
Yeah, it's a core of simple galleries.
Right.
And that's for the artists who have passed. And then there are galleries that people engage with. So Saul LeWitt got engaged with one of the galleries. Right. Kiefer did. I can't remember all, but they all did, and they liked it. And I think just like Daniel Buren taking on, the building, the French building, the one we were talking about, the Museum for Arnaud, became sacred all of a sudden. So for Daniel Buren to cover it like that was very dicey. And I loved it, but a lot of people were very upset, and a lot of people said they felt sorry for me, and I said, no. But I think there's more of that spirit that people want to engage. And when the the French building has an inside and outside. I talked to Jeff Koons about it. I said, would you put stuff in the space between, hanging in the middle? He said he would, and Murakami and a lot of the artists, my friends, I asked them, and they loved the idea of engaging with it. So I think it's a different paradigm than what...
Also, I think there's no true neutrality anyway.
No.
I mean, a white box pretends to be neutral, but it's not really. I mean, it has
And the
a certain-
museums that are all white boxes
Right.
are a lot boring, and I think you have some of that in New York.
Yeah, we do indeed. There's one question here, by the way, that while we're on the
But
subject,
Max Hollein, you lucked out, man.
while we're on the subject
That's
of
the
the
greatest.
Fondation Louis Vuitton, you are so discreet. Why did you agree to allow them to name the Louis Vuitton Foundation restaurant after you? 'Cause it's
I
called
didn't.
Frank.
I did not.
You did not. They did it anyway?
I
Or-
said not to name it after me, and they said, we're going to call it Le Frank. That's different.
I see. So this is called having your name and eating it too, or having your whatever?
But there's a precedent in Toronto at the AGO where we did the museum. There's a restaurant called the Frank too. Frank.
Ah,
Except it's named after the restaurateur whose name is Frank.
I see. And they now call the Guggenheim, I think, restaurant is the Right or something like that now. So, you know,
It's called what?
I think it's called the Right, as in the other Frank, you know.
Oh, the other Frank.
Remember the other Frank? The one,
Oh, well.
okay. While we're talking about Paris, actually, do you have any thoughts about the tragedy at Notre Dame and the discussion that has been in the air about a possible competition? I saw yesterday, or maybe this morning, I saw somebody on Twitter say that they wished you were doing a new tower for Notre Dame.
They did?
Yes, they did. This was not the management of the cathedral, this was not a tweet from Macron. It was just from some person observing the situation. So, what's your sense of that whole situation now? And would you want to do such a thing?
I won't enter a competition.
Okay,
That would be a waste of time over there.
right.
I think they have a great president. I met Macron and talked to him and spent some time with him, and he's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
He's young,
Right.
a little bit brash sometimes, but I think they really lucked out. I hope they treat him well. But I don't know about a competition.
No, I think there's just been a lot of talk about it. I don't
Yeah,
know if
I saw
it's
some of
officially
that.
happened yet. Yeah.
I can't imagine. It would be a miracle if it turned out good.
Right.
So I'm ready for a miracle.
Well, what would you do if they did not have a competition but simply called you and said,
I tell them I'm 9D and I sleep in the afternoons.
and then you wake up and come to the 92nd Street Y?
Yes.
Which I think so. Frank, thank you very, very much for being here tonight. Thank you. Please, thank you.